أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In our lesson today, we shall be talking about the humanitarian logistics and resource management during the time of disaster. But before we start, just a recap of what we covered in our last lesson. In our last lesson, we talked about the disaster management cycle, and we talked in detail about each and every cycle and what it entails. Now, as we are starting our lesson today in humanitarian logistics and resource management, these are going to be the objectives that will be guiding us in this lesson. So by the end of this module, you should be able to, number one, define humanitarian logistics and humanitarian supply chains, explain emergency procurement processes, describe inventory and warehouse management, explain transportation and distribution during disasters, understand resource allocation and mobilization, explain how scarce resources can be managed. Then lastly, identify major logistics challenges in disaster environment. So this lesson is very important, and it is all about resource allocation. During the time of disaster, we need a lot of coordination. We need to ensure that we have enough of the resources, and we need to ensure that we store. Now, so this is what we shall be covering in our lesson today in detail. So, في البداية, we need to define what is humanitarian logistics and resource management. So what do we mean by these two words? So humanitarian logistics and resource management involve, number one, the planning, movement, storage, distribution, and management of goods, services, people, and resources used to assist population affected by disasters and emergencies. So that is in brief what humanitarian logistics and resource management entails. So it is all about having a very good plan, and it also involves the movement of resources from one place to another. It also entails the storage of these resources that you are going to use in the times of disaster, then the distributions of these resources, and the management of goods, services, people, and resources used to assist population affected by disasters and emergency. So we shall be focusing with all these areas: humanitarian supply chains, emergency procurement, inventory and warehouse management, transportation and distribution, resource allocation, managing scarce resources, then lastly, logistic challenges in disaster environment. Now, what is humanitarian logistics? So humanitarian logistics is the process of planning, implementing, and controlling. What are we controlling and what are we planning and implementing? The efficient movement and storage of goods, equipment, services, and information to assist people affected by disaster or humanitarian emergencies. So the main objective of humanitarian logistics is to do what? Is to ensure that the right assistance reaches the right people at the right time in the right quantity and condition. So that is the main objective of humanitarian logistics. So we need to ensure that the people who have been affected, they get the right assistance. And when you're talking about the right assistant, it can be a medical assistant, it can be food assistant, ila ghayri dhalik. And the right people. So humanitarian logistics also ensures that the right people get the assistance. Then also at the right time. Because if these people, if they don't get the assistant at the right time, we might lose lives in the right quantity. Also, humanitarian logistics ensures that we get the right quantity. For example, if 100 people have been affected, then we need to bring food for 100 people. But without humanitarian logistics, you can find that sometimes we bring more or less. But if we have good logistics, we are going to ensure that there is efficiency and effectiveness in terms of assisting the affected people. So, for example, after a major flood, humanitarian organizations may need to do what? To transport food, clean water, medicine, tents, and blankets to affected what? To affected communities. So that is what humanitarian logistics is all about. Now, the other concept is humanitarian supply chains. So what is humanitarian supply chain? It is the network of organizations, activities, people, facilities, and resources involved in doing what? In obtaining, transporting, storing, and distributing humanitarian assistance. So when you are talking about humanitarian supply chain, we are talking about network of organization, because during the time of a disaster, like what is happening now in Nepal, there is currently a very big disaster in Nepal, the border between Nepal and China. There was a mudslide. Currently, there are more than 300 people who have died in Nepal, and still more than 1,400 people are missing. So you find that in Nepal now, there are many organizations that are working to help people, a network of organizations, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross. So the humanitarian supply chain is a network of organizations, and also the activities that these organizations are doing, and also the people who are involved, and the facilities and the resources involved in obtaining, transporting, storing, and distributing humanitarian assistance. So a typical supply chain may include, we have the suppliers. And when you're talking about the suppliers, for example, during the time of emergency, maybe people need medicine. So who is going to supply the medicine? Or for example, food. People during the disaster, they need food. Who is going to supply the food? So there is a source. So they are known as the suppliers. So the suppliers, they are going to supply it to what? We have the humanitarian organization. They are going to procure or to buy the medicine, the food, the tent, ila ghayri dhalik, from the suppliers. Now, once the humanitarian organization, they buy these supplies, they need to store it in a warehouse. So this humanitarian organization, they normally have very big warehouses where they do what? Where they store those supplies. Now, once they store, they are in the warehouse. Now, the next thing is to transport. So you transport it from the warehouse to the distribution point, where you are going to distribute it to those people who have been affected by the what? By the disaster, the affected community. So the effectiveness of the supply chain directly affects the speed and quality. Underline those two words: the speed and quality of disaster response. So if there is any problem in this supply chain, people are going to lose life. We are not going to actually deliver the food, the medicine on time. So we have to ensure that in this supply chain, each and every stakeholder plays their part. Now, what are the components? The components of humanitarian supply chain. Mukawinat, this supply chain, number one, it consists of the suppliers, as we have seen. These are the people who provide the goods and materials. Then procurement. Procurement is now buying. The humanitarian organization or the government, they buy So it's all about purchases required resources. Once they purchase, they need to transport, which involves movement of goods from one location to another. Then warehousing, we have seen it. We have to store the supplies in the warehouse. Then inventory management, it monitors available stock. So there should always be an inventory officer in the warehouse who will help us to manage the supplies in the warehouse. So he'll give us a record of the medicine. Do we have enough or we need to buy more? The food supplies, do we have more or we need to buy? Then the distribution is about delivers assistance to beneficiaries. Then lastly, we have the information management. It tracks supplies and need. We need to have a system that is going to help us to track where the supplies are going. So في نهاية المطاف, the key principle is that all components must work together efficiently. From the supplier to procurement to transportation to the information management, they need to work together as a unit. Now, so this is the humanitarian supply chain example. Now, another important thing is procurement during emergencies. When you're talking about procurement, we are talking about buying, purchasing, or acquiring. So how does it happen? For example, هناك الكارثة, there is a disaster. So how are we going to buy the medicine? How are we going to buy the tents? So when you're talking about emergency procurement, it is the rapid. I needed to underline the word rapid. The opposite of rapid is slow. So during emergency, during a disaster, people have been affected. People are going to die. Property are going to be destroyed. There is no time wasting. So everything needs to happen fast, rapidly. So it is the rapid acquisition of goods. We acquire these goods very fast. The goods, the services, and equipment needed during or immediately after an emergency. So we acquire the goods and services we need في أثناء, needed during في أثناء الكارثة, or immediately after an emergency, or مباشرة بعد حدوث الكارثة. So unlike normal procurement, emergency procurement must balance. So unlike the normal procurement is when there is no disaster. But now when there is an emergency, we need to balance between number one, speed, cost, quality, transparency, and accountability. We need to ensure there is speed. We buy quickly. If there is a procurement processes, those people who are supposed to buy any documentation, anything that needs some signing should be done urgently. Then cost. We have to ensure that we have enough money in our accounts to buy. Then the quality of the things that we are going to buy should also be considered. Then hunaka shafafia, because during the times of what? During the times of disaster, most of the time you find that there is some corruption. So we have some people who will want to benefit. People are dying, but some people, they are just thinking about their stomach. So you give them a budget of 1 million, they take 200,000. They only use 800. So we need to ensure that there is a shafafia, transparency, wal muhasaba, accountability, because you are going to be given money to buy. So the manager or the people who are working during the disaster, they need to be accountable for each and every dollar that they have been given. Now, emergency procurement process. So what is involved in the emergency procurement process? Number one, identify needs. تحديد الاحتياجات. من يريد ماذا. So we need to identify ما هي الأشياء التي نحن نريد. ثم determine specification. When we are talking about specification, we are basically talking about الخصائص. ما هي الخصائص هذه الأشياء التي نحن نريد. Then identify the suppliers. المصدر, where are we going to get the supplies. Then evaluate prices and availability, because you are not going to get from one supplier. No, you have supplier A, supplier B, supplier C. So you need to evaluate what is the price in supplier A is giving us with how much, supplier B and supplier C. So you need to evaluate the prices and also at tawafur, the availability. What we need, is it easily available? Then after that, after evaluating, you can select the best. Then after selecting, you can now purchase the goods and services. Once you purchase, you need to inspect and receive goods in your warehouse. You inspect as you store in your warehouse. Then lastly, you need to document the transaction. For each and every transaction, we need to document. There should be some documentation which will help us to ensure that there is transparency. So the important principle is that emergency procurement should be fast, but it must still prevent fraud. When we are talking about fraud, we are talking about al-ghish or at-tadlis, corruption. There should be no facade, because there are some people, they'll benefit from the procurement processes. Always. There should be no israf. We have to ensure that هناك الاقتصادية في استخدام الموارد. Then poor quality purchases. We should ensure that we don't buy things that are of poor quality. Now, what are the challenges in emergency procurement? Sometimes during a disaster, we need to procure. ولكن في المقابل هناك التحديات، هناك المشاكل. So what are these barriers? What are these obstacles? Number one, urgent demand. So sometimes there is the urgent demand, and we cannot always meet the demand. It's very difficult to meet the demand sometimes. Number two, limited suppliers. Maybe 1 million people have been affected. Like there is an earthquake. So we need many suppliers, but sometimes you'll not find suppliers. Sometimes you'll find damaged markets. Even during the disaster, the markets where we are supposed to get the goods, the markets are also damaged. So where are we going to buy from? It's very difficult. Sometimes high transportation costs, transporting these things from point A to point B. It's also expensive sometimes. Inflation. التضخم. Inflation means that the prices of the supplies are very high. Then shortages, هناك النقص, sometimes you cannot get enough. Then fraud, الغش والفساد sometimes, you know. Then poor communication. Sometimes there is this poor communication can also affect the emergency procurement. Now we've finished khalas. We have finished buying, which is the procurement. What next? The storing of this thing, idaratul makhazin. And this is what is known as inventory and warehouse management. So we have already bought, we have already procured. So what is inventory management? It is the process of controlling and monitoring. These two words, control and monitoring the quantity, condition, location, and movement of supplies. So monitoring the quantity. So there should be somebody in the warehouse, al-makhzan, somebody who is telling us we need 50 kgs. This thing is not available. So there should be somebody who is updating us about the quantity. There should be somebody who is updating us about the condition. Because sometimes there are some supplies that needs to be stored in a fridge. More so the perishable goods. the vegetables, the onions, some medicines they need. So what are the storage conditions? Then what is the location of these procured goods? And how are we going to move the supplies? So in humanitarian operations, inventory may include the food. We need to ensure that you have enough food, enough medicine, enough water, enough blankets, enough tents, enough medical equipment. So it should be enough in our store. So the objective, al-hadaf al-asasi, is to do what? Is to ensure that supplies are available. This is very important. Al-hadaf al-asasi, here tamkin. We always have to ensure hunak, tawafur. All these things are available in our store. Are available when needed in the haja. If we need, we just go to the store and we demand. When needed, without excessive waste or shortages. We should not have israf and naqs. Those two things. Now, inventory control. Important inventory management activities include what? How can we basically how can we basically control the things in our warehouse or in our stores? Number one, recording. Recording is all about tasjil, recording incoming supplies. I am the one who is managing the store. Anything that comes to the store, 50 kgs of rice, 100 bags of A, B, and C, I have to ensure that I have all the details. Number two, recording outgoing. Also, I have to have a record of things that are going out. So I need to have a record of incoming supplies and outgoing supplies. Then monitoring stock levels. When you are talking about stock levels, we are talking about monitoring the quantity, al-kimiyya. Kam nurid, kam indana. Then checking expiry date. It is your responsibility as the storage manager to check the expiry date. If the expiry date is close, you have to ensure that the supplies are going out quickly. Because if they stay there, it's going to be israf. We are going to throw all those things. Then preventing theft and damage. We have to ensure that as sarika, people don't steal. And the goods inside the warehouse are not damaged. Conducting regular stock counts. We should always be ensuring on a weekly, on a monthly basis, we count what we have in our warehouse. Now, we normally have this principle. FIFO, it is called the FIFO. FIFO means fast in, fast out. So in an exam, you can be asked, what is FIFO? So FIFO means that goods received fast should generally be distributed fast. This is especially important for food and medical supplies. So fast in, the foods, the supplies that came in fast, it should be we should supply it fast, considering the expiry dates. Now, what is warehouse management? So warehouse management is the process of organizing, storing, protecting, and controlling goods within a storage facility. So a well-managed warehouse should provide safe storage for our supplies, easy access if you want to get anything inside the store. You can easily get it. Clear labeling. The warehouses, I don't know if you know warehouses. Warehouses are very big. So you should have clear labeling. Section A, B, C, D, E, and F, and the names of the supplies. Then the security also is also important in the warehouse. Then we need to have accurate inventory records in our warehouse. And lastly, we need to protect our supplies and goods available in the warehouse from damage. Now, good warehouse practices. ما هي الممارسات? What are some of the practices that are recommended? Al-mumarasat. These are al-mumarasat for what is the key? The good practices when we are managing our warehouse. Number one, clearly label all supplies. Anything that is coming in should be clearly labeled that this is medicine, Panadol, paracetamol. It should be clearly labeled. This is food, the kind of food, the quantity, ila ghairi dhalik. Number two, separate different categories of goods. We have perishable goods and non-perishable goods. So different types of goods should be separated. Keep emergency exit clear. In our warehouse, the exit, in case there is fire in the warehouse, the exit door should be clear. Protect supplies from water and pests. We have to ensure that our supplies are protected from water and pests. And we can be using some pesticides. You can be spraying it all over the warehouse. Maintain accurate stock record. Conduct regular inspections. Use appropriate storage method. Then lastly, maintain warehouse security. Also, always have CCTV cameras installed in what? In your warehouse. Now we are through. We are going to the next step now. Transportation and distribution. So this involves removing or moving foods supplies from the warehouse. So humanitarian transportation involves moving emergency supplies. The key word is a knuckle, moving emergency supplies, equipment, and personnel from suppliers or warehouses to affected population. Huna, the disaster has now struck. So we need to move the supplies from our warehouse to the areas, regions where people have been affected. So transportation methods may include trucks. These are the big trucks, the lorries, aircrafts, ships, boats, trains, motorcycle, ila ghairi dhalik. So ikhtiyar, the choice depends on what? اختيار الوسيلة تعتمد على المسافة, the distance. So if the distance is a long distance, then maybe you need an aircraft. If the distance is that long. But إذا كان المسافات مسافة قريبة, then maybe you can use a motorcycle or a car. Costs, التكلفة. So you have to know what the cost of the transportation, and do you have the budget? Then the urgency. Urgency basically means the need. For example, the word, there is this word, the magnitude, yes, the magnitude of the disaster. So sometimes, for example, during earthquake, we expect us to do what? To react quickly. The supplies need to arrive quickly, very fast. So we'll need an airplane. But if there is no urgency, then we can use the other sources, the trucks and the trains. Then the infrastructure. Do you have good infrastructure? Do you have good roads? Yes, we can use the road. Then the weather. How is the weather? It will also determine which type of transport you are going to use. Then security. Because sometimes we don't want to transport the supplies. Sometimes you find that the trucks, sometimes they will be attacked by terrorists. So that is why during disaster, you find that the trucks, they'll be transported by police or the military. What are the challenges of transportation? So transportation will become difficult because disasters can damage. So sometimes the disaster, they damage the roads, bridges, they damage the airports, the ports, the communication systems. So transportation even become difficult because the disaster itself has affected or has impacted the infrastructure. So other challenges sometimes include fuel shortages, security problem, flood problems, flooded areas where vehicles cannot move, landslides, like what happened in Nepal. Currently, we had the landslide and the mudslide in Nepal. So transportation is becoming very difficult. You need to help people, but you cannot. That is why many people are still stranded. Traffic congestion. Maybe you want to move from point A to point B, but there is traffic. Now, khalas, we are through with the transportation. At Tawzi, how are you going? كيف يتم التوزيع? Humanitarian distribution. So distribution is the process of delivering humanitarian goods and services to intended beneficiaries, those who have been affected. So it's very important, this point. A successful distribution system should ensure fairness, هناك العدالة. But sometimes you find when it comes to the distribution, you start with your tribe, you start with your people, you start with your family. No, no, no. There should be al-adala. There should be fairness. So that is number one. Efficiency. Efficiency means speed. We distribute it quickly because people are suffering. Transparency as shafafia. There were 10 bags. 10 bags should be distributed. We don't want a scenario where there were 10 bags of maize, but we are distributing 5. Where are the 5 bags going? Then we should ensure safety of the supplies. Then al-muhasaba wal-musa'ala, accountability should always be there. Now, what is the distribution plan? Before, قبل التوزيع, humanitarian organizations should determine who needs assistance, because not every person is going to need, or the degree of assistance is not the same. Number 2, what assistance is required? Some people will need medicine, some people will need water, some people will need shelter. Who needs what? Mother, yuridun. How much is required? Al-kimiyya. How much is required? Where will distribution take place? أين المكان التي سيتم فيه الماذا؟ التوزيع. Then when will it occur? متى سيتم التوزيع? Then lastly, how will beneficiaries be identified? How are we كيف سيتم معرفة المحتاجين? How can we identify that Muhammad was affected and Halima was affected, this one was not affected? How are we going? So we need an answer to all of this. Now, resource allocation and mobilization. So resource allocation is the process of distributing available resources among competing needs, activities, or location. So we need to distribute what we have. And this includes money, personnel, the people, thus the doctors, the nurses, equipment, food, medicine, vehicle, and shelter. So we have to ensure, because during the disaster, hunaka nudra, scarcity, we don't have enough. So we have to ensure that the little we have is distributed or allocated efficiently. So what are the principles of resource allocation? Severity of needs. So هناك المحتاجين في درجة الأول والثاني والثالث والرابع. So not all الدرجة ليست متساوية. Number of affected people, how many have been affected, level of vulnerability, the urgency, available resources, and accessibility. Now, resource mobilization is the process of obtaining and organizing resources needed to support. Where do we normally find the resources? So we need to mobilize from government, international organizations, NGOs, private companies, local communities, donors, and volunteers. We need to communicate. We need to ask. We need to ensure that we ask them to help us during the disaster. Now, During the time of disaster, the resources are not enough. Hunaka nudra. So what is nudra? Scarce resources are resources that are limited compared with the level of demand. Mathalan, we have 100 people who they need, but we have 20 bags. Yet we need 100 bags. That is nudra, right? So during disaster, common scarce resources, sometimes we don't have enough food, enough shelter, medicine, fuel, ila ghairi dhalik. So scarcity requires difficult decision about priorities. So ahyanan, during the time of disaster or when there is nudra, نحتاج أن نتخذ القرارات الصعبة because على حسب الأولويات. So some people they'll have to miss and people will start to blame you. But في نهاية المطاف لا بد من اتخاذ القرارات لا بد. So prioritizing scarce resources. When resources are limited, organization must prioritize those with the greatest need. Priorities include injured people, top in the list, the children, top in the list, elderly people, person with disabilities, pregnant women, people in life-threatening situation. These are the 6 groups of people we need to start with. Now, what are the strategies for managing scarcity? We have needs assessment, prioritization, efficient inventory management, resource sharing. Sometimes we'll have to share 1 blanket, 2 people, or even 3 people, 1 tent, 10 people. Coordination with partners, reducing waste, then local procurement. Now, what are some of the challenges, logistic challenges in disaster? So sometimes you have the damaged infrastructure, you cannot travel because the roads have been damaged and the bridges. Limited transportation means communication failures because the communication lines or the electricities, the internet have been affected. Security threats, we have some terrorists, some militias, limited fuel ila ghairi dhalik. The problem of the last mile. What is the meaning of this? The last mile refers to the final stage of delivering humanitarian assistance from a distribution center to the affected population. This is often the most difficult part of humanitarian logistics. So when you're talking of the problem of the last mile, it is always the final stage of delivering humanitarian assistance. So it's very difficult sometimes because hunaka zahma. Sometimes people are fighting. Look what was happening in Palestine when they were distributing the food. So sometimes people even die because they want. So we have some few slides remaining, around 4 or 3 slides. So sometimes during disaster, we need to use technology, ila ghairi dhalik. Then building resilient humanitarian supply. So that is all for today. Is there any question? We have only 1 minute remaining. I need to take the attendance. Is there any question? So you have a research, you'll be writing a research. This week I will send the research and the guidelines for writing the research. So we still have 1 more lesson. We still have 1 more lesson remaining. So today we will not have another session because the lesson was short.